So, I want to start today with a bit of a counterintuitive puzzle for you.
Oh, I love a good puzzle. What is it?
Okay, imagine someone walks up to you and says they hold the ultimate blueprint for gaining infinite energy, like infinite wealth and just, boundless wisdom.
My immediate instinct is to look for the catch, honestly.
Right. You'd probably assume you need to buy some grueling masterclass or, I don't know, hoard your resources, build a fortress around whatever knowledge you manage to scrape together.
Yeah, because we are totally taught that success is defined by accumulation. It's measured by, how much capital is sitting in your bank account or how much intellectual property you own.
Exactly. You want to conserve your energy for your own advancement. But this person's answer is the exact opposite. They look you in the eye and tell you that the secret to having absolutely everything is to constantly give it all away, relentlessly, until you have nothing left to hoard.
Which sounds like a guaranteed fast track to total burnout. Or at the very least, financial ruin. I mean, it goes against almost every survival instinct we have cultivated in modern society.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is going to completely flip that conventional understanding of having and losing on its head. We are unpacking a really fascinating philosophical and spiritual essay today.
Yes, it's by an author named Feng, and it's titled The Mystery of Obtaining Endless Energy.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore this highly unique framework regarding the physics of spiritual and mental energy. We really want to see how it challenges our most basic assumptions about how the universe actually operates.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of this framework, it is crucial to set some analytical ground rules for this exploration.
Right, a quick disclaimer.
Exactly. The source material contains very specific spiritual doctrines, it references major religious figures, and it ultimately advocates for a specific community called the Life Zen Center.
Yeah, and we should be clear that our goal here is not to endorse or validate these spiritual viewpoints.
No, not at all. Nor are we promoting the organization itself. We are here strictly to analyze the conceptual architecture the author presents, because regardless of your personal belief system, the psychological concepts being deployed here to explain human energy are just genuinely fascinating to deconstruct.
They really are. So let's look at the blueprint of this idea. What stood out to me immediately is that before things get cosmic or spiritual, the foundation of this entire theory is grounded in incredibly practical, everyday observations about flow.
Right, it starts with things you can see and touch in your own house. The foundational argument is that energy must circulate in order to even exist.
Yeah, and the simplest metaphor they use is a room.
Oh, the room analogy is great. So if you sit in a room with the doors shut and all the windows sealed, the air inside, no matter how big the room is, eventually becomes stale.
It just stagnates and goes bad.
Exactly. But if you open the windows on the north side and then walk over and open the windows on the south side, suddenly you create an endless flow of fresh air.
And think about the size of those windows, too. Like, opening a tiny crack isn't going to do much. But if you throw open the entire wall, that airflow becomes incredibly strong.
And that fresh air never runs out. It is inexhaustible precisely because it is moving.
Right. And then the argument moves from the living room to the economy, bringing up the example of a businessman. A merchant doesn't create wealth by just, stuffing cash under a mattress.
No, a profit is only generated by moving capital rapidly. The velocity of money is what actually creates wealth. Hoarding capital renders it dead, yielding zero profit.
Which is just basic economics. But then applying that fundamental principle to human performance yields some really interesting observations about the singer and the athlete.
Yeah, take a vocalist. A vocalist who is constantly performing and practicing is continually sharpening their artistic abilities. They gain recognition, their skills remain incredibly sharp.
But the moment they stop performing and isolate themselves,
They fade into obscurity. Their artistic temperament degrades. And it's the same with physical labor. Using the body is what strengthens the body. Too much rest and an overabundance of physical enjoyment actually lead to weakness and chronic fatigue.
Okay, let's pause and unpack this because I really want to push back a little here.
That's right.
I understand the business analogy. Money has to move. That's just how markets work. And I get the singer practicing their craft to stay sharp.
Right.
But applying this to human energy
Mhm.
as a literal, endless physics equation feels like a massive stretch to me. I mean,
Yeah.
think about your own life or your own career. There is a biological limit.
There is, yeah.
If I run constantly, or if I work 20 hours a day without ever stopping to rest, I don't gain endless energy. I eventually collapse. I hit a physiological wall. So how does this framework reconcile the very real phenomenon of physical burnout with this grand promise of endless energy?
You have hit on the exact pivot point of the entire essay right there. The author isn't actually talking about physical calories or biological limits at all. These tangible physical examples of flow are being used to point toward a much larger metaphysical rule. This basically sets up the core dichotomy of the entire framework.
The distinction between the material world and what he calls the anti-material world.
Precisely. So we are officially stepping out of the physical realm and into the metaphysical.
Got it. So what are the rules in this anti-material world?
Well, the pivotal rule laid down here is that the material world and the anti-material world, which we can understand as the spiritual or mental realm, they operate on entirely opposite mirrored laws.
Okay, so a total inversion.
Right. In the material world, if I have a pie and I give you a slice, I mathematically have less pie. Giving something away necessitates depletion.
But from the anti-material perspective, the rules are perfectly inverted.
Exactly. In the spiritual realm, the more you release, the more your energy actually multiplies.
Which brings up the concept of a wise person. The essay notes that when a truly wise individual constantly gives their wisdom away to society, their internal well of wisdom doesn't deplete.
Wisdom is not a finite resource like the pie.
Right. By releasing it, teaching it, sharing it, their wisdom actually grows. It approaches perfection, and their overall wealth of wisdom increases.
It's totally counterintuitive to how we handle physical objects.
I like to think of it like lighting a candle from another candle.
Oh, that's a perfect way to visualize it.
Right. Because if I have a lit candle and you have an unlit one, my flame doesn't get 50% weaker just because I used it to give your candle fire. My flame remains exactly as strong as it was, but now the entire room is twice as bright.
The energy didn't divide, it compounded. That candle analogy captures the anti-material law perfectly. You aren't losing your fire, you are acting as a conduit to facilitate the spread of light.
And the essay doesn't just rely on abstract concepts of personal growth to prove this, right? It actually brings in some of history's most famous candles to elevate this theory.
Yeah, it elevates it from a self-help concept into a divine universal law. Major religious icons are positioned as the ultimate historical proof of this system, specifically Jesus and Buddha, or Shakyamuni.
The claim here is that the reason these figures possess such massive, unprecedented influence and energy is precisely because they constantly release their energy in the human realm.
They didn't hoard their spiritual insights in a cave. They spent their lives relentlessly giving them away to whoever would listen.
And this is where a very specific and honestly heavily debated quote from Jesus is introduced to illustrate the mechanics of this mystery.
Yes, the quote is, "Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them."
Which, in sociology and economics, is often referred to as the Matthew effect.
Exactly. The Matthew effect is usually used to describe the phenomenon of the rich getting richer while the poor get poorer.
Wait, the rich get richer rule? That usually sounds incredibly unfair. I mean, when you hear that in a modern context, it sounds like a cruel rule of societal inequality. How does a spiritual text justify using that as a foundational argument?
By completely stripping away the moral judgment or the social inequality aspect of the quote. It is reinterpreted here purely as a mechanical law of universal physics.
So it's not about money at all.
Not at all. In this anti-material framework, the concept of having is inextricably linked to the act of flowing. To truly have energy, you must be an active conduit for it.
So if you stop the flow by trying to hoard your energy,
The universe naturally strips away even the little you possess, because stagnation is the literal opposite of existence in the spiritual realm.
wow. And the logic is taken all the way up to the concept of God as the ultimate giver. The argument proposes that God's energy is endless, specifically because God constantly releases energy without ever seeking to possess anything in return.
Right, and connecting one's mind to God's spirit is described as tapping into a limitless ocean of energy.
But, this brings up a huge practical question for me.
What's that?
Well, high-minded philosophy is wonderful, and it is easy to say that divine figures operate this way. But how does a regular person living a normal life actually put this anti-material law into practice? Like, if I want to tap into this ocean without just exhausting myself at my day job, what is the actual mechanism?
That is the million-dollar question. Human beings need structure to practice philosophy. And that is exactly where the essay transitions from universal theory into a very specific real-world laboratory.
Ah, right. The introduction of the community the author is a part of.
Yes, the Life Zen Center, or Shenming Chenyuan in the original text. The entire stated purpose of this center is to create a physical and social environment where members can embody this continuous, anti-material flow.
And to explain how this works in practice, the author borrows this really beautiful metaphor from a classic poem. It's about a half-acre square pond.
A half-acre pond. Okay, how does that fit in?
Well, for this little pond to stay clear enough to perfectly reflect the sky and the clouds, it can't just be a stagnant puddle of rainwater. It must constantly receive fresh, living water from an underground source.
Ah, input.
Right. And just as importantly, it has to let that water flow out into the surrounding earth. Output. So input and output.
It is the exact natural progression of the open windows from the beginning of the essay, just applied to a spiritual community.
Exactly. And inside the ecosystem of the Life Zen Center, the members are referred to by a very specific title. They're called Chanyuan grass.
Grass is such an interesting word choice there. I mean, why not a sturdy oak tree or a blooming lotus flower?
Right. But think about it. Grass is a network. A single blade of grass isn't much on its own, but grass spreads. Its roots interlock, it covers the earth, and it forms a foundational ecosystem that supports other life.
That makes a lot of sense. So the daily practice for these Chanyun grass members is to act as hosts. They are instructed to go out into the world, find gems of wisdom, and offer them to guests of the center.
And the insistence here is that this constant giving does not deplete the members. Rather, it expands their spiritual wealth and widens their path in life.
And the author, Tru Feng, actually puts himself forward as the primary case study for this dynamic.
He does. He points to his own incredibly prolific writing output as living proof that the law works. He claims to write daily, constantly pouring out his energy to the public, and as a result, he considers himself one of the richest people in the world.
Notice how he defines that richness, though. It's fascinating. He points to an unreleased ocean of wisdom he possesses. He explicitly teases texts he has written but hasn't published yet, with titles like Sermons, Anti-Material World, Becoming Buddha, Immortal Cultivation, and Wisdom.
Basically, proving his well is still overflowing despite his constant production.
Right, but let's look at the psychology of that for a second. He is preaching a philosophy of endless, unhesitating giving, yet he is simultaneously teasing a vault of exclusive, unreleased wisdom.
It creates a dynamic of artificial scarcity.
Exactly. He is essentially saying, I have the answers, but you don't have access to all of them yet. It keeps the reader hooked.
It's a brilliant mechanism to create dependency. And he also scales this idea globally to reinforce the value of the network. He argues that if 10,000 of these Chanyun grass members spread across the globe, he will essentially have a home everywhere on Earth.
The logic being that giving to this community inherently expands your own territory of freedom.
But, this is where the whole piece takes a pretty sharp turn for me. We started with a universal physics theory, like the candle analogy, which applies to anyone, anywhere. But now it becomes a very specific pitch for building up his own organization.
Yeah, it definitely shifts.
He's saying, yes, giving is a universal law, but to truly reap the rewards of this law, you need to give your energy to this specific community.
The rhetoric moves from universal truth to localized commitment. He explicitly calls these contributions to the Life Zen Center the boat ticket to heaven.
A boat ticket. Wow.
Yeah. It is described as the foundational requirement for transforming one's mortal life and shedding mundane existence. So the broad, beautiful philosophy of universal flow is narrowed down into a highly targeted, direct call to action to promote the specific infrastructure of the Life Zen Center.
And the essay doesn't just praise the people who buy that boat ticket. It gets surprisingly aggressive toward anyone who tries to operate outside of this system. It severely criticizes anyone who tries to take without giving.
The tone shifts dramatically here into a stark contrast between thieves and hosts. The statement is made bluntly. Entertaining guests doesn't make you poor. Being a thief doesn't make you rich.
It's a direct attack on the mindset that you can quietly accumulate wealth or wisdom by just passively taking from others without contributing to the flow.
There is a fantastic cutting phrase used for this, too. People who try to secretly absorb others' wisdom without contributing anything themselves are mocked as trying to catch wolves with empty hands.
Catching wolves with empty hands. I love that. It is a metaphor for ultimate freeloading. You cannot get the prize without putting your own skin in the game.
Building on that, the most fascinating and honestly scathing critique in the entire essay is aimed at a very specific archetype.
Who is that?
The self-proclaimed hidden dragon, or the lonely hermit. Think of the culturally romanticized image of the isolated genius. The monk sitting alone in a cabin on a mountain, feeling profoundly misunderstood by the world because their thoughts are simply too deep for the average person to comprehend.
The misunderstood philosopher.
Exactly. And the author has absolutely zero patience for that archetype. If you are lonely and feel misunderstood, the essay argues it is not because you are profoundly deep, it is because you are unbelievably selfish.
Selfish, that's a harsh word for a hermit.
Right. But these hermits are accused of secretly calculating their own tiny, petty interests instead of releasing their energy and giving to others.
Let's examine the mechanism of this critique because it is incredibly effective. In many spiritual or intellectual traditions, the hermit is deeply revered. Isolation is seen as a sign of elevated intellect or independence or purity.
Yeah, totally.
But by attacking the lonely hermit, this framework systematically strips away the validity of independent thought. If you isolate yourself to think critically or pursue a solo spiritual path, it is reframed not as independence, but as energy constipation.
Energy constipation. It is a visceral phrase, but it perfectly aligns with the opening metaphors of the room and the pond.
Exactly the point. If you are lonely, it is because you have closed your windows. You have stopped the flow. You are the stale room.
By labeling the independent monk as selfish, any spiritual path that doesn't involve active contribution to a community specifically, his community is invalidated.
It is a psychological control mechanism framed as spiritual health, designed to keep members actively tethered to the group. True enlightenment, in this framework, is inherently social and inherently generous.
A true dragon wouldn't be hiding in a cave. They would be out in the world, releasing energy and changing the weather.
When you step back and look at the entire architecture we have unpacked today, the consistency is pretty striking. Whether you look at it through the lens of a businessman trying to move capital, a singer trying to keep their voice sharp, or the specific community-building tactics of the Life Zen Center.
The central thesis remains unyielding. Stagnation is death.
Yes. Hoarding, whether it is money, fresh air, or spiritual wisdom, inevitably leads to decay. And release, like constant, unhesitating release, is presented as the only viable way to tap into a state of infinite growth.
It demands a fundamental shift in how we view our resources. It challenges you to look at your own life, your own career, and your relationships and ask where you are closing the windows.
It pushes back against the scarcity mindset, where everything is viewed as a zero-sum game, and advocates for an abundance mindset, where the very act of giving is the mechanism that generates the resource.
It is a profound shift in perspective, and one that forces you to rethink what it means to truly have something.
It really is. But as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final lingering thought that I think we need to leave you with. We have spent this entire time dissecting the mechanics of the giver and the necessity of constant output.
Right. But consider the physical implications of that system for a moment. The argument forcefully states that we must constantly release energy to gain it.
Okay.
But what happens in an ecosystem where literally everyone is exclusively trying to be the ultimate giver? If releasing is the only way to generate energy, do we fundamentally need people who are willing to just sit back, be the guest, and absorb in order to complete the circuit?
That is such a good question.
Right. Or is it possible that pure giving, when practiced simultaneously by everyone, somehow creates a perpetual motion machine of human connection, where the energy never actually settles, but just infinitely multiplies in the space between us?